Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just letting folks come in from the waiting room, and then we'll get started in just a minute. But thank you all for joining us. We're gonna have a great conversation today. Welcome, welcome. Looks like people are still filing in. All right. I think we have quorum, so we're gonna go ahead and get started and let folks continue to trickle in. But welcome. Thanks for joining everyone. My name's Hallie, part of the Sydecar team, and as I imagine you all know, we're here to talk about standing out as an emerging manager, how to position your pitch, and I'm joined by some wonderful guests who I will let introduce themselves in just a second. To start with a little bit of housekeeping, we have the chat turned off, but we do have the Q&A box on. So if you have a question throughout our time together, please drop it in there. We'll either answer it async or we'll pop it in if it's relevant to the conversation. And then, as usual, we will save some time at the end for audience Q&A. So feel free to save your questions for the end as well. But without further ado, I'll kick off the introductions and then I'll pass it around. My name is Hallie. I am the head of marketing here at Sydecar. If you're not familiar, Sydecar is an SPV and fund administration platform purpose-built for emerging VCs. So we help you start, launch, and manage your SPV or fund from end to end. And we also like to bring together groups of smart people for educational conversations. So Benedict, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Holly. I'm Benedict. I've been with a single family office for the last couple of years. We stood up a LP strategy focused on emerging managers in venture. We've also founded Embracing Emergence, where we try to foster a conversation between LPs and emerging managers to keep closing that gap of inefficiency. Also background in private lending, treasury, but mainly focused on venture in my time.
Awesome. Jamie, you want to take us next?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Hi, guys. I'm Jamie Rhode. I'm a partner at Screendoor. We are an emerging manager of fund of funds, solely focused investing in emerging managers and pair our portfolio GPs with established GPs. So you not only get capital, but you get counsel as well. We recognize the journey from investor to fund manager is pretty hard. And like Benedict said, there's a lot of inefficiencies and complexities in this type of space, precluding LPs from getting access. My background is multi-asset class, so I came from a single family office and covered public markets, buyout, and venture, but have spent a lot of time in early stage VC.
Awesome. And then Jenny, last but not least.
Thanks, Hallie. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Barba. I'm co-founder and managing partner of Features Capital. Features is an early stage medical technology and healthcare innovation fund, Fund One. We're based in Norwich, Vermont, and we invest in companies across the globe, predominantly in the United States, and at the clinical trial and the first in human stage, as well as first in revenue. And we provide a lot of support and milestones, and we lead deals at this stage. We invest in companies that are changing the clinical paradigm, improving efficiencies, improving health access and health equity, as well as reducing costs to the system, all in companies that are saving hundreds of millions of lives. So it's a really exciting time to be in healthcare.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. Okay, so before we hop into our questions for the panelists, we're actually going to shoot some questions out to you guys, the audience, just so we can get to know one another a little bit better and make this interactive. And so we should be launching a poll right here shortly. We'll have two quick poll questions, rapid fire one after the other. So you should see the first one on your screen right now. And we'll give you guys a couple seconds to answer that one. Should have had some elevator music queued up for this section. All right, 5 seconds more on this poll question. 3, 2, 1. Thank you all. You should see the answers popping up on your screen as we all do. Like I said, this will help us better understand those of you in the audience and cater our answers and in conversation to what will be most valuable to you. And it looks like, unsurprisingly, given the topic, we have a really good representation of emerging managers on the call. We're going to pop up one more question right now that'll be specifically aimed at those of you who are emerging managers, again, just to get a little bit more insight on you all. And there it is. So we will give you another few seconds on this one. I could pretend to sing elevator music, but I don't think anyone wants that. And we'll give you another 5 on this one. All right, 3, 2, 1. And you should all see the results of that poll as well. Cool. So love to see this. We have a lot of folks who are early on in their journey, be that in the kind of pre-launch or fundraising stage, or currently deploying out of their first fund, a couple on later emerging funds as well. And that's perfect, I think, for the conversation that we have today. And so without further ado, I will dive into our questions. Jamie, we'll start with you. So the conversation today is really about helping emerging managers craft their pitch. And I imagine between your time at Verdis and then now at Screendoor, you have been pitched by hundreds of GPs. So what are some of the key components that you and LPs in general look for when they're being pitched?
I think it's really important for GPs to spend a few minutes asking the LP questions before they just dive in, going through like slide by slide on their pitch deck, which most LPs can't stand that. Candidly, right off the bat, I think that every LP has a different mandate, has a different need, and has a different goal with their venture portfolio. And so it's really important for GPs to date around and find the right partnership. It's probably a 15-year relationship. Even though your fund life is 10 and 2, it's probably longer. And so I think as an LP, when GPs just ask a few questions off the bat, it shows me that they're interested in learning about my venture portfolio, and it gives them the background and context to know they're well-versed in early stage, or they're well-versed in my sector that I focus on, or maybe they're not, and I need to spend some time educating them onto the space. And so I think it's really important to use your time wisely, because there's a lot of you out there. And if you get a phone call like that, that's a great sign, but like you need to use it wisely. And so, specifically for Screendoor, we focus on what have your lived experience been on a professional or non-professional basis to give you the right to be the best at sourcing, selecting, and winning. And how does that fold into your investment strategy? And so does that strategy of yours match your fund size? Does it match your portfolio construction? Does it match your thesis? And does it give you an edge in the ecosystem? And conveying that properly and concisely on a call with an LP is really, really important. But also sometimes you could have done nothing wrong, but if the LP already has exposure to the sector and the network that you're investing in, that might be challenging and it might not be worth your time, because when LPs typically build venture portfolios, they're looking for each manager to be highly accretive. So I want to add someone that I don't already have exposure to that part of the market or that part of the sector. And if you are fighting for that slot that someone already has exposure to, you're going to have to shift your pitch around and tell them why you're getting access earlier or why you're getting differentiated access. And so I think it's really important to spend a few minutes just getting to know the LP if you're unable to do research in advance before you go ahead and just pitch them slide by slide on their pitch deck.
Yep, absolutely. One of the things that Jamie touched on there is differentiation, which is, I think, one of many challenges that emerging managers and managers in general face when they're putting together their pitch. we're about to talk about that one a little bit more, but before we do, we'll dive into just one more poll question that will be launched on your screen shortly, talking about what is your biggest fundraising challenge. If you are someone who's currently fundraising, recently finished a fundraise, what was the biggest challenge that you faced in fundraising? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, like I said. And while we're letting you answer that, I saw some questions in the chat around whether or not this will be recorded. I do believe that we're recording for those of you who have to hop out early. But let's close out that poll now and see the results. Yeah, so we were joking before we kicked off
Surprise.
that the answer was going to be money is the biggest challenge. And perhaps one of the ways that you can ease that challenge or fundraise more successfully is by making sure that you are differentiating, like Jamie mentioned on the last question. So let's hop into our next question, which is kind of this idea that emerging managers often struggle to communicate their differentiation, especially in a very crowded field. Whether or not you're a generalist or have a specialization, you are coming up against competition. So this one can be a question for anyone in the group. I'll let you guys decide how you want to start, but how can managers better articulate what sets them apart from other emerging managers?
I'm happy to kick that off. I think what helped me to think about it is I have kids, but let's say you have 3 children, and you're able to compare them next to each other and you see how different they are. But you could be a teacher and you could have 30 children in your classroom. And a teacher could argue to you that you see your kids like this, but the teacher sees your kids on a spectrum alongside other different children. And I think as an LP, and I can speak for myself, but also probably for Jamie, we get to see hundreds of pitch decks, get to talk to countless of emerging managers, who a majority of them are terrific and fascinating, but an emerging manager might get access to 5 to maybe 10 different pitch decks that fellow GPs provide to them and give them advice on what's worked for them, what's not. And there's just a scale to the amount of people and emerging managers we as LPs talk to. And the differentiation becomes less and less to the more and more people we talk to. So I think just having a good understanding of what is truly different and not just of what your perception is of what you think is different, that is probably a helpful thing. So trying to do research, trying to get access to as many different data points and information points you can get of what do other emerging managers do, what helps them, what doesn't. Practical example could be the slide deck, the slide on your deck on here are my co-investors and here are their logos. I think that's probably a slide we see in pretty much every pitch deck, but there are twists to it. One practical advice could be, I put on the logos of the investors that invest at a higher valuation than you do and where you funnel them deals to. Now all of a sudden you have a completely different story. You invest earlier, you have better access, and all these investors invest after you. So I think just recognizing the scale of differentiation that an LP has to look at is probably a helpful thing to think about.
I can jump in and take it from the perspective of like, candidly, I think a lot of things are random. So like skill or luck, like I don't know, and I'm not going to know for a really long time. Like emerging manager fund 1, like you have potential to significantly outperform a lot of the established managers. Like the data shows that, but like why? Is it because like you're accessing new networks, new sectors that are emerging, a bunch of, employees that are leaving XYZ company and having great ideas, and so like your network is super strong today? Like, is that a lot of skill? Is that a lot of luck? Like, I honestly, like, I don't really know. And so like I come in with the mindset of like, what are factors or what are things that I believe that like can be controlled is me picking like a fund manager and I'm looking for that. And so I think it's really important to just like be very transparent. And there's a ton of VCs out there and everyone I think to like get institutional funding, I should say, because there is opportunities there when you speak to high net worth individuals or family offices. They have different needs, they have different goals typically than institutional LPs. But if you're looking to get institutional capital funding and build an enduring firm, more often than not, most of the VCs have some type of similar skill set. And so, like, what's going to set you apart from everyone else that probably has somewhat of a similar baseline as you? Not to like make it very simple or like black and white, but like it's kind of random. And if we've all seen that data at year 5, if you're a top quartile fund, 50% of you will not be top quartile by year 10. Which means that when you're out fundraising for your future funds and you told me that you followed on into the Series A of this really hot company that was valued at a wonderful valuation, 50% of you made a bad decision because it probably will blow up in your face and turn into a 0 because like that's just what the data says. And so just thinking about it from the standpoint of like, I really need to have a strong story and a strong value prop of like, why me? Why am I accessing the top 1% founders when everyone else I talk to is saying the same thing? And so I think it's really important to understand what your why is and communicate that properly and show that you can do this and that you really want to do this because like this is really hard.
And I think from a emerging manager perspective, there's a couple of phases. There's the phase prior to launching, as you're getting your deck together, as you're, you know, building the strategy, the thesis, getting feedback, fund size, portfolio construction, all of these things. But until you're actually investing and then you're getting real feedback from the market, from the founders that pick you, that want you to lead, the founders that want you on the board, on the cap table. And then after you've invested and then the support you're giving, I always say that that's the data. That's the data that is showing you're differentiated because you won that deal, because you are on the board, because you do have a markup, because maybe you do have an exit. I mean, it depends where you are in the stage, but I would think of it as 2 phases. So there's the hypothesis building, the thesis building, you know, the prep, all the prep, the data room, the thinking about, you know, who are some of those first LPs, your champions, who are going to be your advocates no matter what, the friends and family types, you know, people you've worked with. And if it hasn't been in the portfolio construction stage or the deployment stage, you can still get these attributes, you can still get these accolades from prior experience to show why you were selected to be in that certain role where you were. And maybe it's customer or client or other founders and startups, something that shows your street cred, that shows, oh yeah, you are going to be the best, to like double down on Jamie's points. Like, yeah, this is why you are the only person right now who's building this very specific thing in your vertical at your stage, and you know, just continuing to execute those little nuggets along the way. And that stuff you can put in the deck. That stuff you can show, you know, not just the team slide and, you know, names of places where you've worked, but it's really the what did you do and the how behind it for differentiation.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you teed me up perfectly, Jenny, talking about, you know, prior experience, including outside of venture and street cred, as you say. So, you know, before you started Features, you spent a good part of your career working in healthcare. And so can you talk a little bit about how you leveraged that past experience when you went out to craft your thesis and your fundraising strategy for Features?
Yes, this is all I have ever done. So initially I was a neuroscience researcher studying Parkinson's disease, and then went over to the finance side of healthcare back in 1999, working at a firm called Hambrecht & Quist, which was the predecessor to the JP Morgan healthcare team. So the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference originally was the H&Q conference. And that's where I learned that this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. It was 2 a.m. I was flipping a pitch book for a meeting the next day. And as the connector to the capital between the venture-backed companies, the CEOs, the management teams, the brilliant researchers and engineers, to the public markets, to the strategics for M&A, and also to the private markets, always working with venture-backed companies, always in medtech. So, and then my co-founder, Jeff, he has also been in medtech his entire career as an engineer, a biomedical engineer, and as an owner-operator of a company and a builder, having worked with hundreds of companies from, we call it bench to bedside, so from design and ideation all the way to commercialization. So really this strategy is something we've been doing, the two of us, in our careers, and then together now for over 45 years combined. So the thesis just really kind of flows for us. It's all we ever talk about, at cocktail parties where, talking about medical devices. So with that, our experience to craft that into a fund is then the operation side, right? So the asset management side, the fund ops, the portfolio construction, all the nuts and bolts of running a firm, as opposed to just investing or advising or sourcing. And yeah, so I have an MBA and a master's in public health, and from Michigan, go Blue. And I don't know if anyone's from Michigan on the call. We seem to be everywhere. And then Jeff's a UMass Amherst alum, and he's lived the founder's journey, having sold his company and then stayed on as head of compliance and head of M&A at the firm that acquired him. And so between the two of us, this is very natural. When I was noodling on starting a fund, I actually went to Jeff as if I were a startup. So, he worked with hundreds of startups. I said, Jeff, pretend I'm a startup. And then that is what ended up flowing into our partnership. So it became this dynamic of being peers, and then talking about our values, our work ethic, how we want to make a difference in healthcare, our families. So really those partnership conversations, in addition to the thesis of the fund. And I think that foundation really set us to move things forward in a way that was very thoughtful. So if you're a sole GP, if you have a co-founder, what is it that makes you tick? What is it that's unique? What is it that when you wake up every day or you're scrolling at night before you fall asleep, that you're living and breathing? Because this is it's a marriage to the firm. It's part of your family. It's part of your life. And this is a real commitment. We put our GP commitment in. So that's something to think about, that you're doubling down on yourself to make this successful.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. And thanks all for the questions in the chat. I promise we will get to as many of them as possible. I saw one on DPI, which is the topic of one of our next questions. But before we get there, we have one last poll question for you that we're going to pop up right now. I promise this is actually the last one. And again, we'll use this to guide some of our conversation. So take a look, submit your answer, and we'll be closing this one in 3, 2, 1. Pop those results up on the screen. Cool. So awesome to see the experience and the interest with SPVs, and we'll revisit that as part of our conversation in just a bit. So going back to differentiating as an emerging manager and some of the challenges that you face, talking about emerging managers, many of you shared you're either raising or deploying out of your first fund. So not a long track record or any metrics like DPI to kind of stand behind. You're basically selling yourself to LPs. So question for the panelists and any one of you that wants to chime in. How can managers without those harder, track record or metrics think about communicating softer skills, whether that's relationship building, their ability to win, you know, the top % of deals, or anything else?
I think this really goes back to like what I said in the beginning around like your lived experiences and like what gives you the right for a founder, a top 1% founder to like put room on their cap table for you or for you to potentially lead, you know, that round. And I think, you know, it's really being able to explain that. And if you fundraising is really hard, like it's really hard. And you have to talk to a lot of people to like make it work. Now, sometimes you get lucky and it's quick and it's fast, but more often than not, like it's really hard and it's finding the right partnerships where like family office investors probably care a little less about DPI. If you create DPI, like they have to go pay taxes and then take that capital and put it to work somewhere else. Where if you have capital from endowments and foundations, like they're not paying a tax and they don't really care. Like they probably want their DPI faster. So like again, it goes back to figuring out the right partnership and the right LP base for the type of firm that you're building, but being able to showcase your why is really important. And also being able to, especially if you are in a sector specialist or an area that is newer, showcasing to LPs historical comps for the types of companies that you're investing in. And even if that sector is evolving because of innovation and AI, you can still show historical comp or historical exits in that space and say, but now with AI, like there's an overlay and I would add an extra X $100 million, $500 million, $1 billion. Like there's ways that you can showcase your why and making a bet on your sector or your specialty or your area. That's in LP speak, which is always translating to returns in money. And if you don't have the DPI yet, like that's okay, but just showcasing that like investing in me equates to returns and showcasing why.
Yeah, I can piggyback off of that. When you're being pitched, you could argue psychologically there are two things that make you comfortable. We would assess competence, but we also assess intention. And I would say those are two key psychological factors that get you to a yes. So really, just oftentimes the storyline around emerging mentors pitching LPs is that we just care about your competence, we just care about your track record, but we do care about your intention. And for example, listening to Jenny's story, there's value alignment that's involved. There's a family that's involved. There's a whole history professionally that's involved. There's passion. Like you can't talk about anything else but medical devices over a cocktail party. There's just certain things that come up during a story that are data points that good LPs, I would say, digest over time and as you have conversations. I think one thing I've seen helps really well to holistically communicate those things, for example, is explaining the reason of your fund name. Anybody who started a business, you know, you think about the name for your business oftentimes for a pretty long time because you're trying to find one word or two words that encompass what you do, why you do it, your strategy, your approach, all those things. And I'm sure there's, for example, a reason behind Jenny's name, Features Capital, that maybe I don't immediately know just by reading it, but I'm sure there's a story behind it. And stories of, this is what I've actually done, and now I can just repeat it, but with your money. That makes me more comfortable. And then I assess your competence. Can you actually do it? But if you're just pitching me your competence, I will always stay skeptical of your intentions. Not because I automatically by default assume you don't have good ones, but everybody has them. So I think just understanding them is a good thing for an LP to do.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks again for all of those dropping questions in the chat. I'll pop in with one that kind of builds on our last topic, which is how big of a topic is liquidity or DPI for LPs when vetting emerging managers? PE funds seem to struggle with this currently and not looking great for many VCs either. Anything that folks want to add that we haven't already covered?
Well, I think it depends on what fund number you are in. It seems like a majority of the audience is pre-fund one or in fund one, maybe fund two. I would say no LP who is assessing investing in a first-time manager will make DPI or a track record their number one list on their due diligence sheet. It will be on there somewhere on an important item, but it shouldn't be on the top. Fund 1, 2, 2, I would like generally say we assess, did you do what you said you were going to do? If you made changes, why? Fund 2 to 3, it will start getting pretty important that you have the track record and the returns that you were shooting for, plus your ability to double down on your winners becomes more and more important, which is a completely new game that you have to learn how to play. So I would say the importance of those type of returns increases pretty linearly with where you're at with your fund number.
I can share some feedback that I've heard just in general from LPs, as I listen and learn from them. It definitely depends on the industry sector. So for example, deep tech or life sciences, they might be more aware that you're not, there is a J curve and things like that. But that's the fund formation, the portfolio construction model. And then I think some of the early days, if people are writing smaller checks or angels checks, that is a different return profile than a fund investment profile. And so the things I've heard are fund 1, show that you're executing your thesis. Fund 2, they want to see scalability. Well, they also want to see scalability in fund 1. But fund 2 is that repeatability and the ability to increase it and continue to scale. And then fund 3 is really that maturity, even though it's still technically an emerging manager. But as they're thinking about it, this is not just a one-time, the larger LPs, this is a lot of work for them to due diligence, to go to committee, to make that decision. And, they're not thinking about this as just a one-time commitment. They often think about the first fund of maybe putting a little bit in, and they're modeling their portfolio construction along the way, thinking about re-ups and, the next fund and how they can mentor or bring in others. And so that's that scalability piece that I think has to align with the LPs and how they're thinking about, asking them their questions, like how they're thinking about their returns and what is their mission. I saw some of the chats, people are talking about impact and other things. And, really, what is the mission? Is it a foundation or endowment? And they're using that capital for grant making. What percentage of that investment pool is then utilized? Is it 7%, 8%, 10%? What are they trying to target for their grant making? Or for, if it's a university, for their working for buildings and capital, I think about the American Heart Association or American Cancer, research, that grant money provides research, or is it a family office and this is wealth, continuing to do wealth preservation and wealth generation for the next, third generation, fifth generation, and onward, or a fund of funds, right? Because the fund of funds, it's access for them, the co-investments, the direct deals, because they have LPs that they have to hit certain thresholds for. So thinking about how our returns align with the LP's returns.
Yeah. Absolutely. So continuing on this thread, one of the things we talked about with the last question is emerging managers are often selling themselves more than they're selling any specific metrics, selling their background. But another thing that comes up a lot around the conversation about differentiation is personal brand. So Benedict, we'll start with you on this one, and anyone else feel free to chime in as well. But what role do you think a personal brand plays in securing LP interests? And then how can emerging managers think about effectively building their own personal brands?
I think it's a good, timely question. I think the answer depends on how you define a personal brand. I believe we see quite a bit of different approaches to it. I personally would define it as a natural extension of my thoughts, frameworks, and what I do, and sharing that more publicly. I think a personal brand can sometimes be disguised as a shortcut in fundraising, and I don't think it's a shortcut. I think it should be an extension of your reputation and just showcasing more publicly what you do and that you stick by what you do. Um, how can you build that? I think just being consistently transparent and honest. That sounds pretty simple, but that goes a really long way. Um, being transparent enough that you showcase your frameworks, thought processes, how you landed at conclusions. I think we live in a time of information and media where we are often just confronted with results. And I think a lot of people find it refreshing to find out how people got to those conclusions. So I think it's becoming more and more, marketing is shifting away from only being attention based. It is shifting to you have to have the right to distribute to people. And you get that by being interesting. And you're only interesting if you have something to say. So sharing how you think, I think, is a unique way. And I would encourage emerging managers. There's a tendency to think and understand why that you don't want to share all your secret sauces with people. What I would say to that is, yes, I am buying your approach as an LP, but I'm really taking a bet on you being the right person to execute that approach. And I think having confidence in the fact that, hey, I am this emerging manager, I've had this unique set of experiences and skills. There's only oh so many people who can do what I can do. And even if I share my approach, it's a whole different game to execute this approach. And only like this approach fits to me like a glove on a hand, and I'm the perfect person to do it. And I think not being afraid of sharing that, I have seen that work relatively well for emerging managers. So being unapologetic in that, I think, is a good thing. And just let the personal brand back up your reputation. But don't try to reverse engineer your reputation to your personal brand, because that can be, venture capital is a long-term game. It lasts longer than most marriages, unfortunately. So if you build a personal brand that is not reflective of who you are, that won't last very long.
Yeah, I like that. If you're scared of sharing your special sauce, because someone might steal it, it's probably not that special after all, right?
That a lot of cooks might be able to cook it. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Jamie, question for you. We heard a little bit from Jenny about kind of her specialist thesis, and I actually think there's a related question in the chat too. But one way to stand out is to have a very differentiated or specialized thesis or sector that you focus in. And so, but at the same time, those funds might face the challenge of LPs not necessarily knowing their industry as well as they do. And so how should specialist funds like that think about educating LPs on the market opportunity of the companies that they're investing in?
Yeah, I think this is really important to portray in a first call with an LP. And if they've invested in the space, if they understand it, if not, like you could have a 2-pager or you could have appendix slides in your deck on why the sector matters, why there needs to be a sector specialist. Like I mentioned earlier, historical exits. If there's any type of industry data around that sector and its return profiles and its exit potential, but not even just exit valuations, capital intense or not. Like I'm going in at the seed or I'm going in at the A, and more often than not, these types of companies need to raise this amount of capital to get to this valuation. And typically it's an M&A exit or it's an IPO, or just providing that education, because at the end of the day, more often than not, LPs have to go report to someone else, or at least pitch you to someone else, sell you to someone else. So handing them their memo already or a portion of the memo, if even it's a section of like why we need a sector specialist in, providing them that information where you're already doing some of that legwork is really, really helpful and provides them the information and arguments as to, I spoke to 20 managers this past week, and this one really stood out because this makes a lot of sense. Like, look at those historical returns, or look at, what this sector offers and what the benefits are. Or, finding a sector specialist here provides diversification to my portfolio. So, yes, I might be making a sector bet. But even in downtimes or years that aren't so great, look what this sector does, or look why this makes sense, or the business model makes sense and it can endure. And so it's really important to have that handy, because if the LP is uninformed of your sector, you can just serve it to them on a platter and it makes their job a lot easier. And anytime you can make their job a lot easier, I think it's a higher probability of a convert.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll throw in a question from the chat here also for you, Jamie, or anyone else, about sector focus. So the question is, I invest in companies using a specific tech, genetics applied to multiple sectors, healthcare, ag, biomanufacturing. Will being in multiple sectors cause fund of funds to struggle to decide where I fit in their diversification strategy?
I think it's whatever the fund of funds thesis is and who you're talking to, where like, in theory, if you do a couple sectors, then that's less of a sector bet. My personal preference, which everyone has their own beliefs, and I am one of 3 at Screendoor, is I lean more generalist. Like if I go sector specialist, there's certain sectors that I believe you do need a sector specialist for, or to fill the void in an overall portfolio of like 20 to 25 managers. I can't get coverage of every sector through a generalist. But if I'm going sector specialist, it's a really high bar, because I'm not only making a market timing bet on the sector, I'm making a bet that I picked the right manager in the right sector during the right vintage year to go pick that next outlier. So the bar is really high. And so I think even if you are a sector specialist among 3 different verticals, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It gives you flexibility and optionality to find the top 1% founders in all of those 3 verticals. And so again, it's all about how you sell yourself and why you chose those 3 or 4 verticals.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, we have one more question for the panel, and then we'll open it up to some of the questions in the chat. Of course, we've talked a lot about how fundraising is hard, fundraising takes a long time, and often you're involved in fundraising conversations, in some cases months, quarters, years. Sometimes you're talking to LPs for your fund 1 that don't end up investing until fund 2 or beyond. So how can emerging managers think about keeping LPs engaged through the fundraising process, whether that's, fundraising for their fund 1 or building relationships with LPs that might invest into subsequent funds?
I think again, I'll go for it, Jenny.
So this is a long-term relationship, and I've heard all different sorts of stories of people who, we actually have one of our largest institutional LPs originally said no, and then a year later came back and said, hey, we're ready now. And we're like, wow, okay, great. So you just have to assume that anyone or everyone is a potential LP. And, if in terms of keeping them engaged, it's really showing up. It's showing them that you're doing what you said you were going to do. So keeping them abreast, either seeing them at conferences. We have a newsletter. We have co-investments. So as our portfolio grows and the companies we get allocation in the next rounds, that's beyond our fund investment thesis. We open that up to co-investors, to our LPs, and then to what we call friends of features. We have to show it to our LPs first. That's in our docs, but then we can open up to, because oftentimes we get allocation, or once we even got super pro rata. So with that, that's an opportunity for them to co-invest alongside you, or or at least see how you're thinking about this. And, yes, we are talking to people who might be in fund 3, and that is definitely a long term strategy. We also have to balance our return on investment for our time. There's only 24 hours in the day. Even if there were 48 hours in the day, I think we would fill it. So, really, being mindful and thoughtful of, are these high priorities? Have they already said no very specifically, and then say, get lost, versus like, not now, or you're interesting, but maybe go talk to this other friend. The LPs chat just like the GPs chat. And so understanding, okay, well, these groups have really doubled down on climate. And so spending more time there as they get to know you, and maybe their size of commitment, right? So if their minimum check size doesn't fit your fund size and they have to be a certain percentage or below a certain percentage, that then that they are going to be in the next fund, fund 2 or fund 3. So keeping them in the flow. We get to know each other. And so, for example, if they have kids, do the kids play baseball? What is the thing? And so if you're in the neighborhood and you want to maybe go to a baseball game in the spring, or, just these little nuggets that then continue to build relationships, and they might not ever be an LP, ever. Most of them won't ever be an LP. But life's short. So I think COVID taught us, like, how do you want to spend your time and who do you want to spend your time with? And it's the founders and it's the LPs. That's our job, is to make them money. And we have to show them how we do that.
Definitely. Being humble and kind as a GP, as an LP, it goes a really long way. You don't know who you're talking to and where they'll end up in a year or two. They could be switching roles, especially on the LP side. It's also like a very small world. Benedict has an awesome WhatsApp group. And there's a lot of things like that on the LP side where LPs talk. And so even if you're not a fit for this fund today, making sure that you have that good relationship and you do the proper cadence. Different LPs want different things. And so I also think, like, if you're doing your AGM or you're hosting any events, like, just sending that, you never know if they're in your city. Like, those are great casual ways for, like, you to spend time with them, and it's not salesy, it's not pitchy, it's not icky, but building that relationship. And you just never know, if you're not a fit for a Screendoor, doesn't mean that, like, I may be able to help you and introduce you to other LPs that you're a fit for. And it's just a very small world. So not exactly about, like, long-term fundraising here, but at the same time, like, being humble and kind goes a really long way.
I very much so agree. I also agree with what Jamie said on different LPs, like different cadences, like different updates. As a family office, when I get quarterly updates from certain GPs, I get excited and I read them. Do I need to constantly stay updated from GPs who we haven't invested in yet? Those hit my inbox. I may skim the update, but I don't typically like go super in depth. So I think structuring a cadence according to type of LP and importance of LP to you. I would say number one important thing, but that's just because I'm biased, is keeping the relationship with the people that you already have one with. That's probably really important. And then fostering a relationship with potential LPs that are actually relevant to the fund that you're in at the moment, and then following up with them according to what type of LP they are and how important they are to you. I've heard plenty of emerging managers who were raising a $10 million fund. The moment they figured out the mechanics of the cadence, who to follow up with and who to stop following up with, it accelerated their fundraising significantly. So I think testing with the cadence and who to drop and not to be afraid of dropping out of your follow-up. I think sometimes the most efficient thing to do is to stop talking to some people. I'm not saying throw them out and like, oh, they never responded and we move forward. But I think just growing in discernment around that and your LP CRM will probably be magic for emerging managers in Fund 1 specifically.
Yep. Fantastic. And like I mentioned, we have a little bit of time saved for Q&A. Some of our panelists have already very helpfully dropped in the chat and answered some of the questions already. So I'll pull up some that have not yet been answered. Maybe this one is good because Benedict, you just mentioned $10 million fund. So Oscar asks, what advice do you have for small funds under 10 million? Is this I think it's asking, do institutionals have appetite here? In other words, what's an appropriate size for an emerging fund manager?
Jamie, you can back me up, but the way we were thinking about it, you can't, ideally, you're never over 20% of a fund. Ideally, you land around the 10%. That depends on the LP type. But if you then think about the amount of capital some institutional LPs have to deploy and the check size they have to write, it just gets logistically, mechanically really thin for them to be able to invest. If you count a single family office as an institutional LP, I think that's a different story. But
I think when I think about institutional, because we back first institutional funds, which is really important because there's a lot of fun ones out there that aren't institutional in nature. My general rule of thumb, if you want to say from an AUM standpoint, tends to be 15 million or greater, but I've seen it work in the 10 to 15 million dollar range as well. Even at Verdis required audited financial statements, which if you're 10 million or less, more often than not, that's probably not worth your time, money, or headache. LPs pay for it, but it impacts your gross to net spread, and there's an operational burden with running audited financials. So unless you have an LP of significant size or an LP that you think is worthwhile for a long-term partnership requiring that, probably not worth your time. Go spend more time investing. Like that's your superpower. Having to do an audit and all of that is an operational burden. And so that's why I kind of keep it fluid, but I tend to find between the 10 to 15 million dollar mark is when that starts to make sense and you're getting enough LPs that are institutional in nature and could potentially upsize their check sizes in the future. And so I think it's very fluid in what your intentions are of your long-term build and your fund too, or your next raise, but that's usually where I kind of define it. And full-time. If you're not full-time on your fund, I don't care what your AUM is. Like that is not a definition from my perspective of institutional fund.
And I'll chime in here because I spent a lot of time. I spent about 6 months talking to other medtech and healthcare fund GPs, asked them their strategy. How did they start? How did they build their team? What was their fund 1 size, fund 2 size, fund 3? How did they grow and scale? And with that, I think you can just learn a lot of information. The feedback we hear just, from LPs is how does that fund size match your thesis? So is it number of portfolio companies? Is it pre-seed and seed? Is it A's and B's? Check size, percentage ownership in a seed versus a percentage ownership in an A or a B? How are you thinking about follow-ons and recycling? And so I think the dollar size is one thing, but then it's the actual implementation of all of that. And also thinking if you do a first close and then you have a target, also thinking about the portfolio construction in alignment with how much you've raised, also in alignment with the target.
I'll throw out a catchy one-liner because we all love when I always like to say your fund size is your business model. So
yeah.
Yep.
I'll leave it at that.
Love the one-liner. Okay, a couple more quick hits from Kevin. Do you look at multi-stage emerging managers differently, and how should they be pitched differently?
At Screendoor, we focus solely on emerging managers, but mainly at pre-seed and seed. We would opportunistically look at Series A. I think an underwrite on an emerging manager that's multi-stage or tends to be larger in fund size than typically what we invested is looked at differently. Coming from a world where I did buyout and growth equity, there's more meat on the companies. Like, candidly, they're real at that point, hopefully, by the time you're investing at the later stage. And so that does require a different profile, a different background, and a different skill set. It tends to be why I don't love when seed fund managers have tons of reserve and plow it into later stage. And then I'm like, you're not really a seed fund, you're multi-stage. But I think it does require a different profile and a different skill set. And so having that resume and really, again, why your lived experiences give you the right to be the best at doing that and showcasing that is really important.
Agreed.
Cool. Okay, maybe one more. This one should be a quick one. It got some upvotes. What kind of information should be available in the funds data room?
I'll start throwing out things. Start easy, pitch deck, track record, ideally some spreadsheet with your angel investments, prior funds. I've polled LPs on this. They would really like to see your quarterly updates in a data room to be able to track your thinking and updates on portfolio companies, your fund construction model, to reflect your business model, your bio, resume, everything about you that we should know. I think that covers most of the basics. Highlights on portfolio companies that we should be able to dive into without having to ask for it. Anything I'm missing?
You can also hold some stuff back too. Like, I think moving LPs down the line to a close can be really challenging. And so giving them everything off the bat may not be the smartest move. It might be important to hold a few things back and try to gather more information from those LPs. And if that's adding a few things after to get them back in your data room, like, not a terrible idea either.
That's good advice.
Yeah, great point. I know we're coming up on time, so I will say our thank yous. Thank you to all of the wonderful panelists for sharing your perspective. Thanks to everyone who joined and dropped awesome questions in the chat. I know we didn't get to them all, so hopefully we all get chances to reconnect after this offline. We'll be sending out a follow-up email along with the recording for anyone who had to drop early. But again, thank you guys so much for your time and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to say one
Bye.
quick thing. It's been just phenomenal partnering with Sydecar. We've done a handful of our co-investments, all using Sydecar. I have 2 open right now. And your team has just been phenomenal. It's enabled us to meet our goals and invest into the companies after it's exceeded our fund thesis. And I just couldn't thank you enough for having the platform, very user-friendly, great customer support. So just want to thank you for even providing us the ability to do that.
Thank you, Jenny. Yeah, very kind. Appreciate it. And thanks again, all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.